this Transforming Education Summit that will come in September, and the pre-summit now, is not about fixing fast issues that have obviously compounded pre-existing issues in the education sector. So it's not about recovery and catch up. It really is about how do we use this moment to completely transform the education and learning systems. And I hope that that's the spirit of the conversation today. So the Lego Foundation believes that every child should have the possibility to be included in quality education around the world. We have activities in over 60 countries around the world. And ultimately, when we think of quality, we think of breadth of skills. We think of, obviously, cognitive skills, but we also think about creativity and problem solving and critical thinking and all the things that come with a full range of skills that kids develop. They develop them primarily in the very early years, from birth to 6, but then obviously what we need to make sure is that it carries those skills that are playfully acquired during those early years are carried over into the formal and informal learning settings. If we get inclusive and quality education, we also know that we'll get kids coming out of the education system after formal education who will have a deep desire to keep learning for life. And certainly as an employer myself, and as we think about private sector, as an employer, obviously that's what we all want. We know that our employees will need to continue to develop, continue to explore, continue to have the resilience for companies and our workforce to deal with the shocks and changes that happen in the world around us. And at least the way we think about it at the Lego Foundation is that if we can get quality public education right, that continuous learning will have built in an engine into every individual to have that desire to do that. And a lot of the reskilling that companies have to keep doing, whether that's companies or the public sector for that matter, that cost will come down tremendously if kids come out of school with those skills. I just want to highlight another reason why we're really attached to, should we say, getting the private sector to the table for transforming education. And that's got to do with if we really believe that we can transform our education systems, we have to accept that that's a really complex process. There are so many elements of the education system that need to be tweaked, from teacher education to curricular development to various aspects, parents buy-in, mindset change, all the different things that we all know, and many of you have been in the sector a lot longer than I have. But if we keep coming at it from those individual bits and not from a collective whole of system bit, we actually won't transform. So we need to make sure that we get all the different perspectives of society into the conversation on transforming systems. So with that said, and with that opening, I actually think that I'm just going to leave it to you. We're not going to have PowerPoint presentations. We're not going to have other big speeches, etc. We simply want to invite you to take the floor and give a perspective on what role first you feel that the private sector can play in demand generation, in creating new opportunities for change, in supporting part of the learning system, education system. I mean, just to give an example, when some of the big tech companies reduce their barriers for employment, stop requiring formal degrees. They're also inviting in every capable young person into their workforce without necessarily a formal school degree. When others fund daycare centers, quality early childhood development, to ensure that both their male and female employees have the support for childcare. It means that they are setting a chain reaction in motion where not only the kids have the right types of nurturing support in the early years, but obviously that there's more time for parents to spend with their teachers. When the Lego group changes its paternity and it's a parental leave policies so that both male and female employees can spend time with their children in early years, that's also supporting the learning transformation or the transformation of the learning system. So there are many examples, and we'd love to try and get both some examples, some ideas of how the private sector can be an active contributor to transforming education systems. So with that, the floor is yours. And when we've had a little round on that question, I might just ask you another one. We could. Yeah. I have no idea who's in the room, so that's a really good idea. So why don't we go here?
Hello, thank you. My name is Delfin Porschmann. I work for United World Colleges International, which is a non-profit network of schools focused on educating young people for peace and sustainable development. And we have different forms of partnership with the private sector that we can contribute to.
It'll be 15 seconds introduction. So
yeah.
Back.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Carol, and I'm a part of the Global Education Coalition team, specifically the Global Skills Academy here at UNESCO.
Hi, my name is Nantha Duriappa. I'm from the UNESCO Category 1 Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. We primarily focus on the social and emotional learning in curricula and pedagogy. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Peter Verhille. Like Delfin, I work with UWC International.
Good morning. My name is Ulfi Klump. I'm from a private sector company, Festo. We are in the field of technical and vocational education, covering the lifelong learning path, starting from secondary education up to the lifelong learning process in the field of serving industries, businesses, and everyone who is interested in learning something. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Rossi from ADOS Global. We work on the reskilling of the population, mainly cognitive, social-emotional, and digital skills, doing meaningful learning experience design. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tara Shklovsky, and I'm the founder of Technovation. It's the world's largest technology entrepreneurship competition for girls.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Molero. I'm the Chief Government Officer at Teach for All, which is an organization developing educational leaders in 60 countries.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Purna Shrestha. I work for BS International as an organization that works with volunteers in 26 countries in education, upskilling. Thank you.
No problem. Good morning, everyone. I'm Beatrice Matlega. I'm working for Microsoft based in France, and I'm in charge of education skills program for the company.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ewan. I head advocacy and communication at the Bhp Foundation.
Morning, everyone. My name is Tom Danat. I'm the Chief Executive of Street Child. We're an INGO working in 20 countries around the world, focused on foundational literacy and numeracy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Helena Swartz. I work at an association called Circular Friesland, and we work on an educational program to involve all children from primary school to university level to work towards a circular economy and a sustainable society.
Good morning. My name is Edda and my surname is Boon. I'm from Namibia, the Education Ministry, the Deputy Executive Director.
The Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. We work on social emotional learning and digital pedagogies.
Good morning. My name is Roxy Sina. I work for GIZ Germany as an advisor on education and particularly gender equality in education.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Musa Gondwe. I work with the Bhp Foundation. Bhp Foundation is a charity set up by Bhp, the mining company. We have an education program within the foundation. We're currently reviewing our strategy and thinking about our next set of investments. So I'm here to listen and learn.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chuck Melly. I work for Pearson. We're a global education company covering everything from early years through workforce skills training.
Good morning. My name is Boran Shakur. I'm Director for Lifelong Learning at UNESCO Headquarters. I'm coordinating the Global Education Coalition.
Good morning. My name is Bo Crowder. I'm a consultant for Dubai Cares and Education Philanthropy from the Gulf.
My name is Mario Franco. I represent one foundation called Millennium Edu Sustainable Education, and we collaborate with technology companies to develop sustainable education projects based on technology, but not particularly related to philanthropy, but global projects. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Zora Yermesh from Ericsson, a global telecom company, and I drive the company's education and digital inclusion activities. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maud Seegers, VVOB, Teacher Professional Development, School Leadership Development, Early Childhood Education to Secondary, TVET, and General.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm a I'm also Access from Bhp Foundation. Good morning, I'm Consultant from UN Nutrition Secretariat, and we're very concerned about school nutrition, so school hospital nutrition impacting the transforming.
Good morning, Erin Shumray from the Global Education Coalition and Teacher Task Force at UNESCO.
Good morning, James McIntyre. I'm the lead for education and skills with the MasterCard Foundation, a private foundation working on youth employment and education in Africa.
Good morning, I'm Desiree Denaro, and I work as a project officer for Escolas Occurrentes, an educational movement that was born in Argentina and now has offices in 14 countries of the world.
Morning, everybody. My name is Ashti Zedihai, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Global Schools Forum. We are a network of non-state schools operating across Africa, Asia, and South America, serving children from low-income families. Our network includes 30,000 schools serving over 5 million children. And we support the network to improve the quality of education that they're providing through training and development, catalyzing innovation, and strengthening evidence.
So thank you for prompting an introductory round. It's rare that we do that in these settings, and I think that's incredibly useful. So thank you very much for that. Now, may I invite you to give me your reflections on the specific role that you see that the private sector can have in transforming education, meaning making education higher quality and more inclusive. Please share.
I can do the first one.
Go
share.
Go for it.
So
So what I'm hearing is let's make sure that we all align around the same goals for the type of education that our respective societies need. If I can paraphrase that, please.
So let me, I see it is a very delicate partnership. And the reason I say that is we go back to the Article 26 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, where education is considered as a social good in terms of as a human right, as an entitlement. Now, when we bring in the private sector, then there's a price put on that good. And therefore, if one looks at it very linearly, then you're sort of saying that there's a price for a human right. And so there seems to be a contradiction and a paradox there. But on the other hand, in terms of efficiency, I think the private sector is well situated to produce some very good products in terms of meeting with the demand that the demand market is putting forward, which is primarily the demand for the learner. So, and private companies profit. That's okay. That's part of the DNA. So how does profit, social good, equality, or equity rather, kind of play this particular role? And so the government, I think the public sector has to play a very major role. Now there's big issues on the voucher systems, which we tried to, but there's been some criticisms. But on the other hand, it was an attempt to try something new. And I think that needs to be looked at a little bit more in detail. And it might work in some parts of the world, it might not work in other parts of the world and stuff. So I think context plays a very important role in this process. I don't have any answers. I'm just throwing out paradoxes, which is always fun for a discussion. But I think the dynamic partnership is one which needs to be really nuanced both by governments and the private sector in terms of the quality, what the curriculums have been produced, the pedagogy that's been used. And then now with digital, we got another major paradox emerging, which is that data that is generated by the learners on those learning platforms. Who owns that data? Because that data is the new gold, because it tells you about how the student is learning. And if you got enough data, you now with AI now coming on the table, it's huge potentials. So, but again, it could be misused as well. So these, I think, are some of the challenges, I think, when we talk about transformative education and education for the future. How would that look like? And it's going to look extremely different from what we had over the last 300 years. I think it's going to be a really major quantum change here.
Thank you very much. I would be very short and brief. I'm just wearing another hats, not VSO hat at the moment. Then I'm wearing a co-chair hats of inclusion equity of the Teachers Task Force Working Group. And to me, I would like to congratulate UNESCO taking lead. There's a global coalition. One of the challenges, and I know that there might be a minister in this room, they might not tell you because they don't feel comfortable to tell you, but I can tell them the message. And they're saying, all the private sector, you have all the excellent goods, but you come with 10 different, but sustainability, how can we scale up? And I think one of the biggest challenges for transforming education is that you cannot transform education without transforming scaling teachers. So I'm just wondering how private sector can support the national education system to strengthen. As we know, as a private sector, you see products everywhere. You have that idea. So how can you bring that idea of reaching every child, every corner of the world, so that every child have education with qualified and trained and motivated teachers? I'll just leave that there.
Thank you. I would like to share 2 or 3 ideas, considering we born in a partnership between public and partner. And our vision is a very positive vision of this role of private sector. We cannot see a contradiction between the private sector interests and the public good interests. But we need to consider several aspects. Some of the companies here represented, we already work with them. But one thing, and from the 2 or 3 things I would like to share, one of them is not all the private sector is the same. I mean, we have to consider, for example, local companies and their role in education, and global companies and their role. And maybe there are other nuances, but we cannot put all the private sector in one basket. Maybe what we need, and following the resolution on SDGs, we need to look at that, and we use very much one of the paragraphs on the role of the private sector, is we need a kind of a declaration of principles where we can cover the different aspects. But that is the first point. The second point is what we consider very important. Of course, we value the role of private sector in philanthropy, but I think it's very important then the private sector engage not only in education as a sector, but the development of different capacities in the country, including the economic development. Then if we separate the engagement of the private sector in the education from their role in the economy of that country or that community, maybe sometimes we can promote some of the people with more capacity will move out of the country. Then it's necessary align the role of education with the investments of the private sector in that community. And the last point, and maybe I am a little bit biased by the fact that we work with tech companies, and maybe in tech companies I see this a bigger potential. But I think it applies to all sectors, is the role of private sector to fit their products and their services to the local market, and at the same time trying to transfer competence centers, training centers to that countries, link with the education system. And this may be the 3 points I would like to share, not to spare all the time of the meeting. Thank you.
Hi, so I agree with some of the things that have been said. I have another point which might be additional. And for me, the difference, one of the difference between the private sector and the public sector are the risk-taking sort of like mindset. And I think we have a great combination here, like CSOs, social entrepreneurs, private sector, public sector, and just thinking how the private sector can leverage this more like risk-taking attitude and mindset in order to support those innovations that are launched or that are ideated by civil society organizations, social entrepreneurs in the process of piloting and scaling up. Because I think the public sector is more challenging for them to have this mindset for all the obvious reasons. It might be because they have like constituent money and many others, the lack of incentives. So I think like the combination of social entrepreneurs, civil society organizations, sort of like creating these innovations in different fields, then the private sector supporting the piloting and the scaling up of these innovations, and the public sector uptaking those innovations to make them systemic. So for me, that's the combination.
Thank you. I guess a couple of points just to add to what's been said. I mean, firstly, I agree not all the private sector is the same, but I would say all private sector organizations need skills. And I think that is a key piece, is the role that this development of skills in individual countries can take, particularly, I know Microsoft does a lot around this, for example. The other thing that the private sector is very good at is advocating for its own interests. And I used to work at IBM, so I know how good companies can be when it's military pieces. If we could see the energy of the private sector applied to advocating with governments, for example, for meaningful investment in early childhood, where we know those skills begin, in the long term, it will have a great return on investment as well. So I think the voice of the private sector are often missing in a joined up way in countries around what skills and the holistic skills that they need. I think secondly, where again, I've seen this done well, is what the private sector can do in the demand creation side is to remove false barriers where they're not necessarily. So a great example is where private sector companies still require degrees, college degrees, when they don't actually need them, because what that does is help create a demand in a system to keep high stakes testing and university when it's not needed. So I think even those two things would go a long way to bringing us all together, and maybe, as you said, in a whole system transformation way. So it doesn't have to be about money and spending and all of that, but it does mean raising the voice of the sector.
So I would say representing the IT sector, more specifically, we have a focus on digital inclusion, digital skills specifically in our case. But I think this is something that we can generalize on skills globally. The private sector is one of the main recipients of the future workforce pipeline. So I would say that there is a big role for the private sector to help the public sector identify the skill gap within the work environment today and tomorrow to actually prepare so that the education is constructed in a way that it's meaningful, that we are providing the skills that are required in the workforce. And I think from our perspective, we see a strong role for us, the private sector, to really contribute to that effort. So today we do it a little bit in an ad hoc way, all kinds of different companies helping to upskill or contribute, complement the formal education with the all kinds of training, but it's not coordinated, coherent. Every company does it one way or another. So having a way in every country to have a concerted effort so that we can really complement the formal education system in a structured way with the skills that are useful in the workforce. That would be one aspect. And I would say maybe another one of the untapped resources that I see in the private sector is really the know-how, the expertise that we have. And that is something that we should be better at leveraging. How do we bring that out? It could be through scaling up internships. Mentorship is one area that, for instance, we are trying to work on with the Technovation. How can we leverage the resources that we have, the employees, their skills that we have within the private sector to help train others, prepare them for the world of the workforce. For the private sector, what does it mean? It's basically talent acquisition. How can we contribute to build the talents of tomorrow? So it's a win-win from our perspective, I would say. Then maybe another point, if I may. Someone I think was mentioning, I think a couple of people were mentioning innovation. This is an area where the private sector is obviously very interested. So fostering innovation through concrete and co-created type of environments between the public and the private sector, for instance, centers of excellence, centers of innovation. That is one area also where I think we see great potential. And the way in some of the countries this was possible to implement, because it requires, of course, funding, is that some governments have put in place what we like to call sustainability laws, where there is requirements from the private sector to invest part of their profit, about 2%, for instance, in India, in this type of projects. And then there is co-creation, so there is a way from a tax perspective to secure a budget, and then there is a co-creation between the public and the private sector through this kind of innovation activities. So for us, this has been one way where we have been able to scale activities in collaboration with the public sector. Thank you.
I had a few things there that I just want to hold on to. As we think about transformation, we are talking about all actors, all parts of the system. And so that whole of system approach and a general, how do we at the national community levels really have a coherent common view on what the future of education should look like and what education in a nation should be doing for growth, for development, for human rights, and that's obviously something that's on our common agenda. I'm going to go over there, and then I'll come here, and then I'll go there, but then I'll also change the question a little bit, and I'll invite you to think a little bit more about what you might dream of in the education system.
Thank you. I'll try to address both of them at once. I think for me, I do see that the private sector obviously is a lot more agile than our governments perhaps might be, or also international organizations. Still, it would be great to have a whole system approach, sort of aligned values, things that we all work towards. I've heard multiple things such as early childhood education. I've heard socio-emotional learning. And one of the things that we as Germany also during our G7 presidency are working towards at the moment is gender transformative education systems. That means the systems need to be inclusive, they need to be resilient, and they need to have a focus on marginalized children that have a lot of potential, including girls, but moreover, everyone.
So it would be great to see how the private sector can support this more, how we can work together to really arrive at the outcome of every child receiving the education that they need to strive not only in the workforce, but way earlier as human beings. So how do we provide the skills that we need for the societies we want to live in, all of us? Thank you.
Yes, maybe a few comments from my side. I agree partially with a lot of points which have been said here, and I can only speak from my side as a private sector company. First of all, I congratulate UNESCO for taking the initiative to create the Global Education Coalition and the GSA. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to launch this initiative, and I think it has a great future ahead and can be very sustainable in the next decade to come. The second thing is private versus public. There is a wonderful goal under the SDGs, which is the goal number 17. And the goal number 17 is regrouping the NGOs, the public sector and the private sector. So this is what brings us all together here, the goal number 17. So this is fantastic, and we should build on this. From a private sector perspective, we are a industry company, a very focused industry company serving 200 different industries with components, but equally, and this is very important, also our educational part is smaller. We put a key focus on skills development and education from the early stage, STEM education up to the lifelong learning path. And what we want to do is here contribute because you mentioned innovation in industry. Obviously, innovation in industry needs to have skilled people. So what we would like to see is to create the framework from the demand side, from the policy making side, but also from the supply side, because we are suppliers and we are the demanders of the workforce and of the skilled workforce. The people we teach today are our future employees in our companies. So this is very important for us to put a focus in different areas. By the way, you cannot cover it all. You have to structure it from in the ages and the sector industries and so on. But to bring together here a little bit more to focus on this on the skills supply side and the demand side. Some concrete examples. I can only speak for our field, but we would like to bring a little bit more concrete action into this to this table here, because we have seen a lot of PowerPoints, we know a lot of papers, etc. But during my work, I always ask myself, what does a little girl in a country, how can this little girl benefit from my contribution in the education sector? And this is for me a very crucial question. What can I bring to the table that this little girl finds her way and makes a living and develops herself and her career? And so I would like to see in this Global Education Coalition and the Skills Academy more concrete. It has had a good start, but more concrete action. Yeah, for example, in our field, we contributed in the water sector, wastewater. Water is a hot topic all around the globe. And maybe the next one is electrician or whatever. But being concrete, this is my demand here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So from our foundation, Futuro Foundation, we are mainly focused on low and middle income countries, and specifically primary and lower secondary education. So basically what we're trying to do is to develop 21st century skills in those children that was mentioned, because we believe that since those early years is very important, even early primary it's also very pre-primary is also very important. But that's our main focus. And what we do is basically we try to partner with public, with ministries of education, but also with other NGOs such as Teach for All. We're collaborating in Africa, trying to upskill and train teachers and focus on skills that teachers need to be better teachers, such as leadership, collaboration, etc. And what we're trying to do is basically do that through digital learning and innovation and training. And so, but what we see that is lacking is this more interrelational collaboration among all the actors. This is an example. We can upskill, we can train teachers and coach them and make them better teachers, but there's still a teacher shortage, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, where we're working. And that's something that we cannot, from the private sector, change. So that's something that needs to be maybe better managed together with big international donors, multilateral donors that are also helping these countries develop their education systems and transform them. So I think that from the private sector, we can really show how innovative solutions and innovative approaches can really change and transform education. But there's also a systemic change that needs to be done with the help of these international and big donors that are helping countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I hand over to you, let me tweak the question a little bit and invite you to come into that. But before that, maybe just to hold on to the value of teachers. I mean, nobody in this room, I'm absolutely certain, would question the fact that we need teachers that are motivated, that are respected, that are valued in society for our education systems to thrive. And while each part of the ecosystem of education may have different responsibilities in that respect, there's one thing we can actually all do together, and that is to shout out and value teachers. Because if we don't do that together, if somehow the teaching profession becomes devalued in a country, it actually comes back and hurts all of us. And it's that, just venturing that as a collaborative space. Another thing just to reflect on, because my personal journey has been one of public sector, nonprofits, and private sector, and multilateral sector. So I've worked for all the different entities around the table, and in every entity, we think we're special, we think we're unique, and we a little bit think we're better than the other. And the reality, having worked everywhere, is that there are enormously valuable, unique contributions made by all. So while we're today talking about the value of the private sector and that contribution that obviously will come from there, I think one of the barriers that we probably collectively need to break is that sense of being a little bit better than everybody else, because we can't transform education without each other. So just wanted to hold on to at least those two pieces, and then to invite those of you that take the floor now to take it as a given that the private sector has a role in transforming education, but then also to come with some examples of what you think you would really like to prioritize as a change in the education systems that you know. What is that one thing that would add the most value to all of us as we think about transforming systems? And what's something in the existing systems that you would love to leave behind? Just say, let's leave that, let's throw it over the shoulder, leave it behind, and what would you add in?
So I can share an example from what we've been doing. So Technovation has been running for 15 years, and we've collected a lot of data on what inspires girls from 120 countries, all sorts of backgrounds, to become real world problem solvers. And so the model is the competition where girls aged 8 to 18 work with mentors from universities and industry. And over the course of 12 weeks, identify a problem that aligns with the SDGs, and they create either a mobile app or an AI-based prototype. And they then talk about how they would launch that in the real world. So they have to come up with a business plan, a pitch video. And at the end of the day, they have come up with very innovative solutions that to problems that they personally face. So one of my favorite ones is this girl from a slum in Kibera. She spends 4 hours every day going to collect water. So she made an app to connect water sellers with water buyers. And it brings funding into the community, but it also frees up time. And we have so much data now about the long-term impact of this experience, because the mentors, and because of COVID, actually, they've become virtual mentors, which is even more powerful because they can connect to mentors from other countries. We have found that 76% of the girls go into STEM careers, and because of Technovation, because of this deep experience that they've had with a role model who continues to support them. Many of them offer internships at their companies and open up a completely new horizon. And so based on that, we are working on a plan to reach 25 million girls over the next 15 years. And I was looking at the numbers to see where are the mentors going to come from, because mentoring is such a key element of this piece, where employees from the tech sector can share their skills and be this long-term support infrastructure. That teachers are a key part of this, but teachers don't have the bandwidth to provide all the skills that young people need. We only spend 20% of our lifetime in formal learning institutions. So why do we expect teachers to do everything, right? So there are roughly 55 million professionals in the ICT sector and about 230 million students in universities worldwide. So these are untapped resources that we can bring to support young people, to support youth in collaborations, to build the skills of the future, which is real world problem solving, innovation, things like that. So I think that if we can, I think Technovation is actually a successful example, and we have so much data and evidence to show that it's working, but now we need the right partnerships to actually scale it even more. So I think to answer the question of what we should leave behind, I think we should leave behind rote memorization, where standardized tests. I'm from India. I'm a product of this horrible system of where you just memorize things because you don't understand it. And I think engaging young people with find a problem, project-based learning, things that are relevant to them, that give them purpose, is what makes them a lifelong learner. And that's what we've been finding is our curriculum is working when you ask them, what do you care about?
Back very much. Yeah, I really appreciate this discussion and your question about what do we dream of, and what the private sector can do in this, and also your call to action to see this multi-perspective view. I think the most important thing is trust that we have to bring to the table. How to develop structure systems that contribute to this trust, that we trust each other, learn to speak each other's language from a educational sector, private sector, public sector, and then share a common agenda or a shared ambition to work on the SDGs together. And as no size fits all, there was also remarked yesterday, I think we have to do this in a regional context. That's where the trust can be restored.
Thanks so much. Just to echo your comments, from our perspective, what we've been dreaming about and what we want to leave behind is a world where public and private have been seen as sort of antagonists trying to do different things. And what we're hoping for is a world where we're aligned, as you said, around the same objectives. And from our perspective, what we feel that the non-state or private sector brings to the table is sort of energy, efficiency, agility, innovation, and financing and funding. And so we're hoping that that can be additive and we can align around objectives. And again, congratulate UNESCO and the Global Education Monitoring Report for encouraging and really congratulate them for this whole systems approach that you've spoken about. Just to give a really real example of what we're trying to do to contribute to this is we've launched these impact at scale labs, which try and catalyze and harness the innovation that we see across our network. Provide them with flexible funding and coaching so that we can think about how they can be scaled. Because one of the challenges is really around scale. What we heard yesterday is pilots no longer work, and we need to think about how we can solve problems at a big scale. And so if we can support innovations with funding, with strategic coaching, and then provide them with a pathway to scale, whether that pathway to scale is in partnership with government, is about taking that innovation to the market, or indeed partnering with other organizations around sharing that innovation and developing toolkits and guidance around how to do that effectively, we can really try and bolster stronger partnerships between public and private sector.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to maybe shift the question from what do we dream about to what do learners dream about, in the sense of beneficiaries of education, young people, young women in the world, and the world that they want to see. And I think this shift involves having more of an intersectional lens, because in front of our dreams, for many millions of people around the world, there are barriers. And until we understand what those barriers are, we can't begin to design solutions. So there are examples of innovation where the public sector is working with nonprofits and the private sector to create solutions that immediately address those barriers to education. And in doing so, for example, yesterday we heard about Technovation, where young girls are working with nonprofits, the private sector, to design apps that immediately address a problem in their community. So the co-creation is happening at the source. And I think until we collectively address that shift in thinking, that we don't have all the solutions, that we don't know all the answers, and that we start to work with the beneficiaries of learning, that we begin to find those solutions. So I think that's the thing that I'd probably want to leave behind, that we understand what the solutions are and that we begin to co-create a lot more. Thanks.
There seems to be serendipity of thinking there, because my comment is aligned with yours. We talked a lot about innovation. I think there's one area of curriculum innovation where there's some relatively simple methods that can be applied. And I think one method in particular, and that's to encourage through curriculum an entrepreneurial mindset in the learners. It's something that we apply at UWC through our schools, through our short programs. The idea being that, students will learn from their mistakes. They will learn from experiential learning. They will understand that to fix the world's problems, they have the solutions individually, collectively. And I think at the end of the day, it's not that everyone will become an entrepreneur or, create a business or work in business. They work in all fields. But I think this is the area where the intersection of private sector, public sector, NGOs, where there's such a great fit, because, we all aspire to, a better world with peace, sustainability. And I think if that can be ingrained into national curriculum plans, regional, local curriculum plans, encouraging this entrepreneurial mindset, we'll go a long way towards fixing the world's problems.
It's working. Okay, yeah. So yeah, Street Child. We focus on children facing the worst forms of learning poverty. They're either out of school or they're in schools where they're learning nothing at all. And when I think about the private sector, I struggle to see the short or medium term rationale, because, well, if I think about Street Child's own work, our largest program at the moment is in Afghanistan. Breaking news, it's hard to see what is the short-term business rationale for investing in learning in Afghanistan, for example. You're not going to get a business case together that's going to give you a return in a short to medium term time frame. But I really think in this entire summit, we need to focus the majority of our attention on the children suffering the worst forms of learning poverty. And again, that's children out of school and children in schools learning nothing. And so what is the role for the private sector then? That's what I spend time thinking about. And then moving forwards to what do I dream about? It's that the private sector does bring its phenomenal resources. And actually, I don't think we spend enough time being brave enough to talk about financial resources. We talk about skills, agility, innovation in the sector. Actually, corporate sector has a vast quantity of money. And I'm delighted that Lego is leading this foundation, is leading this session, because Lego is leading the way in shelling out very large quantities of money to all parts of the sector that needs it. And how do we get, in a sense, I don't want to make Lego blush here, but how do we get more companies to see the bigger picture? Because I don't see how really we're on a pathway to significant involvement of companies in beyond middle income and upper income countries, because there isn't a business case for it. And I'll wrap up by saying what I kind of wonder about, and maybe you asked about what do we dream? I dream that perhaps we can create a sort of global citizenship norm, that it is unacceptable for children to be in extreme learning poverty, and that those who have the most, and that's private individuals and companies, that's where the money is, it's just not acceptable not to be donating, again, a large portion of your effort to eradicating the stigma of extreme learning poverty. And because the business case isn't going to stack up, so it has to be a more moral humanitarian case. And I think we need to find a way of making it. And in conversations like Lego, Pro Futuro, and I don't know about some of the corporate foundations in the room who are active in being highly generous. How do you feel you can get? How do you feel you can get more companies to replicate your behaviours? Otherwise, I don't see how the private sector is going to make a big difference to the worst forms of learning poverty. Over.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Stacy from New Globe. I think that what I certainly dream of the most connects to what a number of people have said around full system transformation. So a future where there truly is alignment between the private sector and government. And we're working together to use structured pedagogy. Like I know Ben Piper mentioned it a lot yesterday, but that idea of being able to understand the impact of structured pedagogy and then work with government at scale to see their systems transform over a long period of time through the usage of structured pedagogy, from the lesson plans to how we support teachers with ongoing support and training, to what it looks like to transform classrooms and also transform the way that governments manage their schools, so that it really is a long-term approach that we're supporting them to execute on their own vision. And I think that what I would like to see a move away from is initiatives or plans that don't leverage on that data around the value of structured pedagogy and the value of partnerships, true deep partnerships with government, where it might look like a one-time training versus understanding the value of, perhaps having a large initial training with teachers, but then over time, continuing to support them and continuing to train them and provide capacity development and seeing the change that brings about. But also, focusing on the teachers and the school leaders, but also thinking about the governments themselves and all the support that the private sector can provide to help them get even better at what they already do. Thank you.
Let's hold on to the fact that a lot of what we're all doing is not evidence-based. We know what works for kids, and many of you do, but we also know that that's not necessarily what's driving the policy changes and transformation that's happening. I mean, we know that education that is child-centered, that's context-based, that is co-designed with teachers, etc., where there's a real dialogue between those that are creating the curriculums and the policies and those that actually have to implement it. All those things we know is what will transform systems. And it's not really happening. So how do we create that movement for an evidence-based transformation? because we don't have to create an awful lot more evidence to know what works for kids and what works for teachers and what works for societies. But that's a different thing. I had down here with the World Bank, and I'll come back, and then I will pose a final question, and I will give you all literally, I've counted, so I think you can have 30 seconds each to sort of tell me what is that one thing. What is that one thing that we need to do together and that we can do without worrying about where we come from, private sector, public sector, etc.?
Thank you. I'll keep it very brief. I've heard a lot of very interesting things, good ideas. From the World Bank's perspective, who pays? That's sort of the key thing. I mean, you can easily create these islands of happiness or islands of good projects, islands of entrepreneurship and so on. But Kenya is going to be short of 120,000 teachers in 5 years. There isn't money. So, and there's philanthropical representation from some of the biggest companies in the world. Is tax something that should be discussed? I mean, I know Lego and other firms in here obviously pays tax, and it's not a problem, but I think you have to introduce who finances. Are private companies in developing countries paying enough tax? And it's not unproblematic to be paying more tax in a country where corruption is rife and there's a lack of social contract. But there is an elephant in the room, in my view. So I think from my perspective, hearing all these good initiatives is great, but how do you also as a private sector world or sphere bring on those types of perspectives in countries where you have operations that, yes, more taxes will be paid, but there has to be more social sector spending. There has to be a stronger social contract. There has to be these elements. Then we can help finance 120,000 teachers in Kenya or these issues that are arising. If not, it will be pockets of great initiatives. It won't be systematic change. Thank you.
Pay taxes. I've got a lot of hands. If you can be even shorter than the last question, give me 5 words on what are those transformative things that you do. Listen to kids, pay taxes, whatever you want to say, keep it short.
Following up on your, when you brought it, evidence. So the key words is and a community that I think has been missing is the academic community. So my keyword is transdisciplinary science, which means it brings in contradictory issues. And you mentioned that we know a lot of things, but sometimes a lot of those are even challenged as well. Meritocracy is one. It's been challenged. It's in fact caused bigger problems than what we have. And replicable evidence, which means it can be. Thank you.
I think the private sector and the public sector should work on standardization of EdTech products together. And that means if you're standardizing EdTech products, because a parent or a teacher, there's so much out there, you don't know which is the best one to take. Something can be like $500, something can be 5 rupees, but it might deliver maybe the same kind of learning outcome in critical inquiry, in whatever you want, in the kind of learning that you want to happen. So if there's standardization for learning products, it goes into research, then the research for learning. So the private sector and the public sector should work on standardizations together.
basically we listen to them. I mean, as scholars, we don't come into places with prepackaged solution, and that's sometimes difficult to justify for donors. So we create spaces to listen to teachers and youngsters, and then we'll help them to develop the skills to do some initiatives, especially youth-led initiatives. I think that the collaboration with the private sector in this specific issue is key in order to help us develop the initiatives that the youngsters have developed to address the topics they feel as urgent in their own communities.
Great. Standardization, yes, for sure. I mean, I think it's incredibly important that we not only standardize products, but also standardize learning and teaching and learning. As you mentioned, we know what works, but also where the business community can work with education is standardizing outcomes as related to skills, so that each student, each individual will have a clear pathway to some sort of job. And that's where the businesses can work with the education entities to create that.
Thank you. Very short. Three telegraphic proposals. First, I think the private sector should invest in large-scale projects, not only in pilot. I don't go to explain myself for the question of time. Second, the private sector should, in my point of view, cooperate in these large-scale projects and not work sometimes separately from one company to another. Maybe we need more co-opetition development with different companies which are competing in the market but can cooperate in these large-scale projects. And third point, to answer your question, we need to solve the evidence problem, not measure only the outcomes, but focus on measuring the inputs, because sometimes we are too much focused on the outcomes when, in our point of view, education and the role of teachers and the role of education is to measure the inputs and how the things evolve from the basis, because we cannot compare situations which are completely different from the basis. Then that's my answer to the good question you put. Thank you.
I just have 7 words for you all of us rather. Don't leave girls and young women behind. Let's not forget that. Thank you.
I would say trust and support school leaders and teachers as the valued professionals that they are. They make it happen every day. And on the core issue, the core standards issue, indeed not reduce it to the very fundamentals only, keep it a breadth of skills without overloading, again, curricula, because I think that's also one of the major challenges for teaching.
I want to borrow your word, drop our personal ego. We are the best. Let's work for the common goods. Education is a public good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. 120,000 teachers needed in Kenya in 5 years' time. If we gather the evidence, if we know what works for teacher training and pedagogies, if we raise the money, we raise taxes, we gather money from the private sector or foundations, is the dial going to shift? Are we going to get those 120,000 teachers in the classrooms in 5 years' time? And if the risk is, or the answer is no, then we need to look at solutions. Is that working more with the private sector? Is it working more with NGOs? Is it working more with foundations? And all of that means that maybe we need to renegotiate the social contract around education and what that means for systems. Thanks.
There's no doubt that what the Secretary General has called for in terms of the summit is a new social contract for investing in education, where we leave our self-interest behind and join up behind the global movement for education systems. You wanted to comment?
Yes, just what to mention that we need to think in the medium and long term as a private sector. We need to stop thinking about short-term investments, because systemic change, transforming education, is a systemic change, and that takes time. So we need to be there for the long run.
Thank you. I would say we need to better collaborate to scale inclusive, sustainable access of quality of education. And one way is that to make sure that education motivates, engages, and empowers both the learners and the educators.
Now, there's also one thing that we have too little of, all of us, and that's time. So I'm going to give you 12 minutes back, because you have just basically done the summary of this. I'm not going to try and repeat everything that you said. I want to do one thing, and that is answer the question about what's in it for Lego. Absolutely nothing other than a core piece of society development. If we're all investing in this, it will come back to all of us. It's not a bottom line issue, it's a society issue, and it is that joint compact for investments in us and in the kind of world that we all want. And you know what that framework looks like? It's the Sustainable Development Goals. We've all been part of creating it. It's not the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We were all there, hundreds and thousands of us as they were being developed. We were all at the table in different ways. And we have a common goal. We've got a lot of will and compassion and co-creation in this room. And let's go in.